I was staring at myself in the mirror, struggling to zip up the back of my red dress. No matter how much I tried to pull it up, the zipper wouldn't budge. My nails were digging into my palms, and I could feel the tension building. It was getting late and Benjamin was still in the shower. I can't wait even a minute, I muttered to myself. I still needed to fix my hair and finish my makeup before we left for the event. Letting out a frustrated sigh, I dropped my hands to my sides. Through the steamy shower glass, I could see Benjamin's silhouette. I hesitated for a moment before heading to the bathroom door and giving it a soft knock. "Benjamin," I called out, my voice a little shaky, but the sound of the running water drowned out my words. I wasn't even sure if he could hear me. I was standing right at the door when a voice behind me made me jump. "What's wrong, Alberta?" It was Gail. My whole body froze in an instant. Turning around slowly, I saw Benjamin's dad stepping out of his room and walking toward me. He was wearing a casual t-shirt and gray pajama pants. The zipper," I mumbled almost inaudibly, my voice barely above a whisper. Heat flushed to my cheeks, spreading like wildfire. Gail's eyes flicked to the open zipper at the back of my dress. If you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel and watch this video till the end. Trust me, this is one story you don't want to miss. Now back to what happened next. "Oh, I see," Gail said, a slight smile playing on his lips. He stuffed his hands into his pockets and took a few more steps toward me. "Want me to help?" "No, it's fine, thank you," I replied quickly, though even I wasn't convinced by my own words. I tried again to pull the zipper up on my own, but this time I fumbled even more. My hands were shaking, and my breathing had quickened. Gail paused for a moment, then silently stepped behind me. "Really, it's no trouble," he murmured, reaching toward my back. His fingers brushed against the thin fabric of my dress, and I could feel the coldness of his touch through it. As Gail grabbed the zipper, I froze completely, holding my breath. I could feel the chill of his fingers through the delicate material. Squeezing my eyes shut, I silently wished for the awkward moment to pass. "Looks like it's stuck," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he tried to tug the zipper upward. The fabric of my dress tightened, pressing against me and almost pushing me forward. "If you just pull a little harder, it might work," I said, though my voice cracked with nervousness. I could feel Gail's breath behind me, and my heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. "Not as easy as I thought," Gail muttered, giving the zipper another firm pull. Suddenly, there was a loud snap. The zipper broke. In that instant, my red dress slipped off my shoulders and fell to the floor. I couldn't breathe. Frozen in shock, I just stood there staring at the dress pooled around my feet. Other than my underwear, I was completely exposed. "Oh, Alberta, I'm so sorry," Gail said, his voice deep and laced with concern. He bent down to pick up the dress and held it out to me, but I still couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in the moment, unsure of what to do next. The sound of the water from the shower stopped suddenly. Benjamin had turned it off. Panic washed over me like a wave. I quickly grabbed the dress off the floor and pressed it to my chest, spinning around to face Gail. "Please, let's just pretend this didn't happen," I said, my voice shaky and low. Gail averted his eyes, nodding slightly, still trembling. I held the dress tightly against myself, feeling the weight of the awkwardness in the air. "Thank you," I mumbled hurriedly before darting out of the room, avoiding any more eye contact. Once I reached my bedroom, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. I stood there for a while, trying to calm myself down. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. How had something as trivial as a stuck zipper led to this bizarre situation? Was it just an absurd coincidence or some twisted trick of fate? Thankfully, Benjamin was still in the shower and hadn't seen any of it. Wasting no more time, I pulled out a simple black dress from my closet, no zippers this time. After a quick glance at myself in the mirror, I fixed my hair, steadied my breath, and made my way back to the living room. At the event, Benjamin was his usual elegant and charismatic self. The way he spoke confidently and commanded attention was mesmerizing. I felt proud just watching him. Gale, on the other hand, mingled politely with everyone, occasionally glancing my way with a small smile. Those glances didn't seem out of the ordinary, but I couldn't shake the unease lingering in my chest. When we got home, Benjamin looked completely exhausted as he stretched out on the bed. He started talking about his work plans for the next day. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. Everything seemed back to normal, yet the storm inside me hadn't settled. Benjamin was one of the most reliable people I'd ever known. His love and respect for his father showed how much he valued family. He'd convinced me to live with Gale to keep him company, something I'd agreed to because of how much it meant to him. Gale was 65 but still had an air of authority and wisdom about him. Despite his age, there was a magnetic energy in his demeanor. And then there was me, a 38-year-old woman often told I had a charm that went beyond my years. I was aware of it, it was impossible not to be. But tonight's strange encounter with Gale had left me questioning things I'd never thought about before. Benjamin fell asleep quickly, his steady breathing filling the room. Listening to him, I let out a quiet sigh of relief. At least the night had passed without any real incident. Still, the memories kept replaying in my head as I drifted to sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in my life was shifting. For the next few days, life carried on. I tried on as if everything were normal. I spent as much time as I could with Benjamin, but whenever I was alone with Gale, I couldn't ignore the shift in his gaze. It was subtle, but I noticed it, like he was looking at me differently, almost like he was drawn to me. Things continued like this until Benjamin announced he had to go on a business trip. The moment Benjamin mentioned leaving town, I felt a strange pit in my stomach. I couldn't explain why, but the thought of being alone in the house with Gale made me uneasy. Of course, I couldn't say this out loud. Benjamin, as always, was kind and understanding but also firm. He didn't want his father to be left alone, so leaving me with Gale seemed like the natural solution to him. "Taking care of my dad won't be too hard for you, will it, darling?" Benjamin asked, looking straight into my eyes. At that moment, I couldn't say no. What could I have said? How could I possibly explain that awkward moment with Gale? Just thinking about it made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. When Benjamin kissed me goodbye and got into his car, I stood there watching him drive away, feeling both empty and strangely tense. The house seemed normal that day. Gale was his usual quiet and polite self, but those looks, I could feel his eyes lingering on me a little longer than they should. He was watching me, but not like a father would. We had dinner together that night. I kept the conversation to a minimum, mostly letting Gale do the talking. The topics were ordinary, but there was something about his tone, like each word was layered with a hidden meaning I couldn't quite grasp. After dinner, I retreated to my room. Once I closed the door, I took a deep breath. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. Gale was an old man, wasn't he? But those looks, what happened that day, the dress falling to the floor, I couldn't get it out of my head. I lay in bed but sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts were running wild, and a strange restlessness coursed through me. Finally, I decided to get up and grab a glass of water. The house was silent, the ticking of the clock echoing faintly down the hallway. When I reached the kitchen, I didn't expect to find Gale there, but there he was, sitting at the table with a glass of wine in his hand. When Gale lifted his head and looked at me, I saw that same look in his eyes again. It unsettled me and, oddly enough, rooted me to the spot at the same time. "Couldn't sleep, Alberta?" he asked in a calm voice. "No, just came to get some water," I replied, trying to sound normal, though my voice cracked slightly. Gale smiled and took a sip of his wine, his gaze still fixed on me. The way he looked at me made my skin prickle. "Come sit for a bit," he said, motioning to the chair next to him. Every instinct in me screamed to walk away, but I didn't. Avoiding his gaze, I slowly sat down, and in that moment I felt it. Things in this house were about to change. There was something intoxicating about the way Gale spoke. The way he looked at me, the subtle humor in his words, it was like he was pulling me into some kind of invisible orbit. The usual boundaries I was so careful to keep felt like they were slipping away. I found myself letting go, relaxing in a way I hadn't expected. In the quiet stillness of the night, as we talked, something new formed between us, a connection. I couldn't tell if it was strong or fragile, but at that moment, it didn't matter. Our conversation felt like an escape, transporting me to another world. The thin fabric of my nightgown shifted against my skin as I moved, and a wave of unease washed over me. The white nightgown, I couldn't tell if it was the cause of my discomfort, or if it was the way Gale's intense, focused gaze rested on me. Somehow, though, all my worries faded. For a brief moment, I felt at ease. I even felt safe. Gale's small jokes, his playful yet sharp teasing, made me smile. Then I realized how easy it was to talk to him. The flow of our conversation was effortless, natural. It felt like he understood me in a way I hadn't been understood before. Sitting there, listening to him, looking at him, trying to decipher what was happening, it all stirred something deep inside me. A small voice in my head whispered that I should be more cautious, but silencing that voice, focusing solely on Gale's, was far too easy. Then, for a moment, Gale was so close to me that I was aware of almost everything. Even the light fabric of my nightgown seemed to hold meaning. I took another sip, but the drink was just an excuse, a way to blur my mind and not let the moment slip away. "Alberta," Gale said, his voice trembling just a little. I lifted my head and looked at him. There was something more in his eyes now. Slowly, it felt like the space between us was shrinking, and at that moment, in a way I didn't want to admit, I leaned in slightly, almost willingly. But deep down, a voice was screaming for me to stop. I knew exactly what was happening, yet I felt lost in the moment, drawn in by the calm and understanding he seemed to offer. It had been so easy. The seriousness in Gale's voice, the weight of the moment, was impossible to ignore. There was a heavy silence in the kitchen, filled with tension but also some kind of pull. Gale took a deep breath without breaking eye contact and gave me a faint smile. As his words spilled out, I realized he had been holding on to this for a while. There was something about that moment, that day when your dress fell to the floor. I haven't been able to get it out of my head, Alberta, he said, his voice calm but deliberate. His words echoed in my ears, and I felt something strange stir inside me. I don't know why, but in a weird way, I liked it. Just remembering that moment sent a wave of something different through my body. It felt like he was truly noticing me, seeing me, and that realization made my heart race. My eyes, a mix of surprise and hesitation, met Gale's as I struggled to push these feelings. But the sense of ease I'd felt moments before was so deep, I was caught in the uncertainty of what he might say or do next. His gaze was full of something undeniable, and as he stepped closer, I could feel his breath. In that instant, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. As Gale leaned in, a part of me tried to stop him, but my thoughts were getting blurry, my words caught in my throat. He moved closer, and then his lips met mine. Everything shifted in an instant. It was so confusing, happening so quickly that I felt like I'd been transported to another world. At the same time, I was questioning everything, what I was doing, why I was doing it. A few seconds passed, but those seconds felt like a lifetime. Something snapped in my head. Suddenly, I pulled back, my voice trembling as I said, "What am I doing?" There was something flickering in Gale's eyes, but I tried to pull myself together. I had to figure out what to do next. I didn't know how to process what had just happened or how to end it. "Gale, you're my stepfather. This isn't right," I said, my words coming out shaky and strained. Saying it out loud gave me a small sense of clarity, but the conflict in my eyes and the tremor in my voice revealed everything. I don't know how to explain such a complicated moment, but that night, in that instant, everything changed. Gale's advances, the way I felt, I wanted to push it all aside because it left me so confused. But there was something else, a fear, a shame, and most importantly, Benjamin. Suddenly, everything started to feel so wrong to me. This is so messed up, I thought to myself. Do you even realize what would happen if Benjamin found out? The words got stuck in my throat like something or someone was trying to pull me away from those thoughts entirely. What happens now? What have you done? That voice in my head grew louder and louder with every passing second until it felt like it was screaming at me. It was so overwhelming that I felt completely exposed, like I couldn't protect myself from it. In that moment, I saw something shift in Gail's eyes, but I didn't stick around to figure out what it was. I decided to head to my room. No matter what, I knew I had to do something about this. I rushed upstairs, slammed the door shut, and sat there feeling completely tangled up inside. I wanted to forget everything Gail had done, to erase it all somehow. But how? How could I possibly get this disaster out of my head? And then there was Benjamin, our relationship, everything we had. What was going to happen now? Later, when Gail realized he wasn't going to get what he wanted, he was left alone. I stayed quiet for a long time, zoning out, but the uneasiness inside me didn't let up. The next day, Benjamin came home. I knew Gail could sense the shift in the air, but at that moment, it felt like everything had come to a final breaking point. I knew I had to talk to Benjamin, telling him about everything Gail had done, opening up about it. It wasn't going to be easy. But in the end, when Gail finally left the house, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Still, the guilt and shame inside me slowly started eating away at me with each passing day. The way Gail looked at me, the way I'd felt in those moments, I couldn't fully understand any of it. But eventually, I wanted to make a change. The thought of a baby, Benjamin had been talking about it from the very beginning, something he'd wanted for so long. I decided to be open to the idea. Over time, I pushed everything else aside. I wanted to forget it all. I made a decision to move forward, to let things slowly but surely get better in my relationship with Benjamin. I buried that mistake, that confusion, as deep as I could. I never forgave Gail or myself, but I told myself that maybe eventually I would start to feel okay again. And then the baby. Yes, we decided to have a child. We wanted to take our lives in a new direction, truly forget. I don't know, but I did bury that night forever. Everything, absolutely everything, had changed. After what Gail did that night, life somehow went on as if nothing had happened. Benjamin and I both thought things would work themselves out, but deep inside me, the shadow of that mistake was always there. I wanted to forget that night, but whenever Gail's name came up, whenever I thought back to the past, I'd find myself reliving it all over again. Forgetting it, forgiving myself, none of it was easy. Benjamin's wish for a child had always been something we talked about. Let's have a baby, he'd said at the time. Saying yes felt like a relief. Maybe with time, everything will heal, I thought. A child could give us a fresh start, right? Nothing else mattered anymore. Time passed and eventually, we had a child. But that's when things started to get messy again. When the idea of Gail coming over to the house to see his grandchild came up, that same uneasy feeling started creeping back in. Those looks of his, the way he made me feel, the thought of him being in our home holding our baby, it felt like it was about to pull me back into something I'd been trying so hard to escape. The fear, the doubt, it grew a little more every single day. Gail's interest in our grandchild unsettled me all over again. Every time he held the baby, I swore I saw that same old look in his eyes. It was like reliving a memory I desperately wanted to forget. Benjamin thought everything was perfectly normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling deep inside me. I couldn't fight off that sense of dread. And then that day came. Gail showed up at our house to see his grandchild. Did he really care about his grandkid, or were those old feelings for me still lingering? Remembering the way he used to look at me, I felt this tangled mess of emotions rise up inside me again. Benjamin wasn't home, it was just us. I thought I'd buried that moment, that I'd moved on, but now all those old feelings of unease were bubbling back to the surface. What should I do? Were Gail and I going to be left alone together again? Was everything about our grandchild about to change? And one more thing, Could Gail have actually forgotten about that night, or was there something else, some deeper plan hiding behind it all? Nobody had the answers to these questions, not even me. To be honest, I still didn't know what I was supposed to do about it all. If you've made it this far, I know my story's gotten to you. There's so much more to share, and trust me, you don't want to miss a thing. So hit that follow button, turn on those notifications, and leave a comment with your thoughts about this story. I can't wait to hear what you think, so let's talk about it in the comments. Your support means the world to me.